So good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all to another series today in our virtual seminar. We are happy today because we have a very special guest amongst us. But before I go ahead to introduce her, I am going to tell you as usual briefly about our Center of Excellence in Migration and Global Studies of the National Open University of Nigeria. We have these seminars bi-weekly in this center, but today we are stopping the rest for today to have a very special presenter who is to present to us about migration and from Australia, but right now in the Center of Excellence in Migration and Global Studies. So on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, Professor Olufemi Peters, our amiable Vice Chancellor at the National Open University of Nigeria, I welcome you. And I want to just remind you that this center was established in February 2020, just before the lockdown of COVID. And since then, the center has been waxing strong, and of course it is to deal with migration issues in Nigeria and all over the globe. And this center, of course, we know that global migration and mobility has become part of human history, and the center has the vision to be the bridge between humanity and the future, and the mission is to provide sustainable leverage for interdisciplinary research in migration and global studies. And of course, our mandates are as follows: to provide leverage for field-based and solution-driven research, to serve as agent of national policy for migration studies, to seek grants ability, to publish and photograph series, to collaborate with stakeholders in the field and policy makers, to organize occasional seminars, conferences, and public lectures. I want to tell you that our journal for this center is called the International Journal for Migration and Global Studies, and it is produced twice in a year. It started 2021, and we had volume 1 and issues 1 and 2 for that year. And this is 2022. We've had volume 2, issue 1, and the issue 2 is going to be out as for November. I hope very shortly, before the end of this year, the issue 2 will surely be ready. And so many other activities that the center has been taking part in. And we are always ready to collaborate with people who have like minds, that is, whose business is about migration and global issues. So on that note, I will introduce our presenter for today. Our presenter for today is no other than Simona Schreeb. She is a student, a PhD student from Austria, who is having her field work here in Nigeria, and to be precise, in the National Open University of Nigeria, the Center of Excellence in Migration and Global Studies, as the host institution. And she is a PhD candidate, like I've told you, at the Department for Migration and Globalization in CEMGS, Austria, since 2019. She's currently working on the project From Returning Back to Reintegration, a focus on Nigeria as part of her PhD study. So you can see her focus is on Nigeria. So we all Nigerians should be all ears and be ready to listen to her presentation and contribute to it seriously. Simona holds a master's degree in criminology from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. specializing in sociology of law and criminal justice. Through her work for international organizations in different countries during the last 10 years, she has developed extensive experience with crime prevention and human rights issues, particularly on trafficking in persons, smuggling of migrants, corruption, and juvenile justice. The focus of her work in her current workplace, university in Austria, is on return and reintegration migration. In particular, the research aims to provide insight into the objective as well as subjective natures of return and reintegration processes, living conditions and well-being of migrants returning back to their home country. Since 2020, she's also a board member of the PhD network of the IMISCO, the largest European network of scholars in the area of migration and integration. Today, our topic is titled The Institutionalization of Assisted Return Policies in Nigeria. So I'm going to hand over to our presenter, Simona Shre, to start to share her personal knowledge with us, her intellectual property she should share with us today. And we welcome her to start her presentation now. Simona, you are a co-host, so you can share your screen, and I give you about 40 minutes to start your presentation. To take your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Annette. It's really been a really great pleasure to be here with you the last couple of weeks. And I really like, first of all, and also giving me the opportunity to talk today and to present some of my findings and some of my work that I've been doing the last couple of months. My talk today is part of my PhD. So it's just one of the small parts. It's still an ongoing process, as I've had the chance to collect a bit more data the last couple of weeks. So it's still a little bit in the preliminary phase still, but I really look forward to the discussions afterwards, and I really look forward to some of your feedback on this topic. And so I hope you can see my presentation. Is that okay?
Yeah, your slide is visible. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So then I can continue. So I start off with a quote from an investigation that was carried out in 2020 by Euronews. And the quote is, "There's no happiness that you are back. No one seems to care about you. You came back with empty-handed." So many returnees have returned through the so-called assisted voluntary return programs. I've had several experiences as the Nigerian beneficiary of the IOM, so the International Organization for Migration, joint initiative with the European Union. However, we see on the policy level that these AVR programs continue to be promoted as the best policy option in the context of return. So just a little bit of a background in terms of literature on return and integration. It's the last years we've seen a lot of studies and a lot of scholarships on return and integration migration. So just a really small overview of what kind of studies have been conducted already and what are some of the findings. So first thing is that there are no accurate global estimates of return migration. This is due to a lack of general data and lack of agreement on definitions of what return actually is. So returns can be spontaneous, initiated by the migrant themselves without any state involvement, or organized by states and international organizations. Normally, the literature on return migration distinguishes different aspects of return. One is the intention to return, the other is the actual act of returning, and the process of reintegration back into the country of origin. So we see within academic research, we differentiate between the return intention, so in other words, the motivation, the returning act itself, and post-return or reintegration. And research really aims to explore the determinants, both in the intention of returning and the return itself. However, this is a very complex endeavor, and until today, there hasn't been really an empirical consensus on this. So the studies continues and the research continues on these aspects. If you look in the past, return migration was historically thought to be an end part of a migration cycle, but this has changed because recently research studies have shown that return movement may only be another step in a cycle, as we see a bit of more fluid way of life and mobility as there used to be in the past. So we see return not only at the end of a migration cycle, but rather as one of the many steps within a continued circular movement. So the reasons why people migrated and the reasons why they return, therefore, have their effects on the possibilities and constraints upon return and their integration back into their country. In the European context, since the early 2000s, member states within the European Union have started to view return as an instrument to combat irregular migration. So return programs have continued to surge as the European Union developed different programs and continued to reevaluate and restructure these programs in response to cope with migration, especially irregular migration. And this decade, in the 2000s, has been labeled as the return decade. So in the last decades, return migration has really continued to be studied with an assumption of voluntariness or degree of agency regarding the decision to return. This can be quite problematic. It is difficult to distinguish whether return is a conscious choice or it is forced upon the migrants, especially in circumstances by the government or the host country. Before going into a bit more details, I think it's important to really provide some definitions. As I mentioned earlier, there hasn't been really consensus on the definitions, but I just want to highlight a little bit the different definitions of return. So there's two main aspects of return. One is voluntary return, and this is the assisted or independent return in the country of origin, transit, or another country, based really on the voluntary decision of the return. So within voluntary return, we see spontaneous return, which is the voluntary independent return of a migrant or a group of migrants to their country of origin without any support of states or any international or national assistance. Another part of voluntary return is the assisted voluntary return, and this is the administrative, logistical, financial, and reintegration support, which is normally to rejected asylum seekers, victims of trafficking in human beings, stranded migrants, qualified nationals, and other migrants unable or unwilling to remain in the host country who volunteer to return to their countries of origin. So this is voluntary return. When, for example, IOM, they also have definition of assisted voluntary return and reintegration. And this means that there is a reintegration assistance in addition to the return assistance. So this is what IOM is usually defined as the AVRR in short. On the other spectrum, we see the forced return. And this is defined as a migratory movement, which, although the drivers can be diverse, involves force, compulsion, or coercion. So this is a little bit of a background, just to give you an overview of what kind of returns we are talking about, so that it gives a bit of context of what I then will present. Okay, so I'm just going to set a little bit the scene on the returns, and specifically for Nigeria. So from the European point of view, of course, rejected asylum seekers often resist the legal obligation to return. So policymakers have really tasked migration management and have really tried to use these AVR programs to incentivize and to support reintegration in country of origin. So why these programs have been used more widely to be less politically costly, more humane, simpler, and cheaper than forced return. So in other words, deportation. However, we see that there is a bit of limitation in the monitoring and evaluation of these so-called programs, and we know a little about how well they actually work and whether they promise the support is given or not. And as I said before, there is a lot of general lack of data, and there's a lot of large data gap also on post-return due to the lack of definitions and established indicators of measuring integration. And so we usually have data mostly on voluntary returns, because this is IOM and other international actors who provide the data. Unfortunately, we have less data available on deportation itself, and we have basically almost none data on spontaneous returns. So it's a very difficult and complex phenomenon to really have an overall picture of how many numbers we're talking about. So many of these schemes are either targeted to rejected asylum seekers within the European context, but are also targeted to people in transit countries. And so there's these two targets, mostly those living in the global north who have been rejected asylum seekers or do not have any valid regular status in European context, or those who have been stranded, for example, in transit countries such as Libya. In the African context, we can see that there has been a lot of funding provided by the EU and also individual member states in order to really enforce these projects on return and integration. And the main aim here is, at least in the discourse that we see, is to tackle the causes of migration. In terms of gaps, there are certain gaps in monitoring and evaluation of these programs. Especially in the West and Central African context, there's very little research done from that. And most studies which are actually published are in the form of policy reports who are actually commissioned by stakeholders such as the EU or consultancy firms such as Altai and Samuel Hall for IOM. So there's very little, let's say, independent research on these aspects. So here, just to illustrate a little bit of, and I hope you can see it very well, I won't go into too much details, as this is not really my focus, but just to show you how much money is actually given within the Western or the African context. So in total, we can see that 4.7 billion was provided on both return and integration, but also other projects. So we're talking about a really big chunk of money here. And I don't know if you can see, so this is under the breakdown of the UTF, the European Trust Fund, which started in 2015-16 until has ended. So these are all the interventions on return and integration in the African context. So you can see that there's, if you can really see, Nigeria is about 17,000 or 17,437. It's a very small specific numbers. It's just to have an overview of how much funding is actually provided in this context. So I guess I would also have to somehow explain why I think Nigeria is an interesting case study. So Nigeria was actually one of the first countries to subscribe to the Common Agenda for Migration and Mobility, the CAM. And this gave the impression that Nigeria was eager for partnership with the European Union. So the CAM in 2015 paved the way for the EU's migration dialogue with Nigeria, and return and readmission agreement was the main priority in that aspect. We can see later in 2016 that a partnership framework on migration as a follow-up to the Valletta summit was formalized, and it really set out a framework for cooperation on migration with third countries And again, within the 5 priority countries, Nigeria was also one of the 5 priority countries, along with Ethiopia, Mali, Niger, and Senegal. However, it's interesting to see that so far, until today, return and readmission negotiations are still going on between Nigeria and the EU on return. So there seems to be a bit of a negotiation still going on until today. So there is currently no readmission agreement, formal readmission agreement between Nigeria and the EU. So this is quite interesting to see in the next years if there will be a readmission agreement formalized. Here, just to show a little bit the data that we do have on return, but also irregular arrivals to Europe. And here I'm always a bit skeptical because this data comes from IOM. So I'm always a bit careful to use data from IOM because they may not always provide the overall view on the data. So I'm always a bit skeptical. But anyway, so we can see here that in Nigeria in 2017, there was a peak. And then what's interesting enough is that there was less irregular migrants between 2018 and 2019 and even 2020 during the pandemic. But what's interesting to see is that there is suddenly in 2021, there is an increase of irregular migrants who arrive to Europe. So it's quite interesting to see how this trend has changed. So there could be many reasons for this. On the other graph under, you can see, again, this is data from Eurostat, so from the European side. And here you can see how many persons are actually ordered to leave and how many persons are actually returned. So I don't know if you can see very well, like for example, the higher numbers are actually those who have been ordered to leave. And just to explain what this actually means, so these are people who are rejected asylum seekers or irregular migrants who receive an order to leave. So who will receive, they are irregular, so they are unable to stay in the European context, so need to leave the country. The little dots, or the little circles that you see here, are those that are actually returned. So the number is quite low of actual returns. And this is something that I will come back to a little bit later on the numbers and the data that we have on the actual returns to Nigeria. So here, just to really show you a little bit who are the actors in Nigeria. Of course, IOM is one of the main ones, but there has been also a project called the ERIN, which is the European Return and Integration Initiative Network, and Nigeria was also part of this program. The only thing is, at the moment, this program has actually stopped. It's actually finalized now in June 2022. And Frontex, actually, so the board, what's it called exactly? It's the board guard agency of the EU has actually taken over this program since this year. So what are my objectives in my work that I'm doing? So I'm really trying to examine the intertwined logics of assisted return practices through specific case study, discussing and problematizing the dynamic intersections between return, integration, and humanitarianism politics in their current practices. So I really try to understand the ongoing efforts to institutionalize and to resist voluntary return mechanisms at the international, state, and sub-state levels. So I really focus on the implementation of the different programs in a specific context, and this will empirically support additional fundings, pointing to similar issues, the practical outcomes of these financial instruments that I've mentioned before, the UTF, the European Trust Fund for Migration. So my research questions are these two. How has the institutionalization of return, integration, and readmission evolved in Nigeria? And what is the impact of institutionalization on the legitimacy and efficiency of these policies in terms of encouraging returns? So this is my objectives and my research questions that I have at the moment. Methodology, I'm mainly using qualitative methodology. So this is based on the case study and detailed analysis of project documents, policy papers, as well as semi-structured interviews that I have conducted even the last couple of weeks here in Nigeria, and with the different European institutions working with Nigeria as well. So this was predominantly IOM, the ARIN program, but also different other actors. So for example, civil society actors, NGOs providing assistance, GIZ as well, as they have a lot of projects as well on integration. So this is a little bit the methodology that I've adopted for my work. In terms of theoretical framework, I have two overarching frameworks that I specifically focus on. So externalization is one. And what do I mean by that? It's externalization is both visible in practices aimed to outsourcing care. So for instance, through funding of NGOs or economic incentives, and control. So financing, for example, border guards, reinforcing detention centers. And here the goal is really to protect European borders from illegal entries and to address the root causes of migrations in countries of origin and transit. So I would argue that the reintegration support for returning migrants is part of this externalization, as policymakers deem it really important to reduce the overall drive of irregular migration. So return migration is really the central point of externalization of migration management. And of course, within this migration management, normally the international organizations such as UNHCR and the IOM are really the main actors providing these services for both countries of host countries and countries of origin and transit. But that's not all. I mean, there are also other locally CSO, civil society actors who do also provide, for example, reintegration services, and these include normally development of faith-based or humanitarian non-governmental organizations, as well as returnee groups themselves. So I would argue that the externalization of migration management in Nigeria is primarily performed by international organizations, development agencies, both internationally and locally, civil society organizations as well. In terms of institutionalization, by this I mean that institutionalization of a policy normally results from both material and symbolic struggles within a specific field. So I'd rather argue this is a social process within which distinct actors confront, but also oppose, and ultimately adhere to arbitrary but legitimized social order. So in this sense, the institutionalization of migration policies of nation states is subject to pressures from the domestic, historical, and external forces. And I would argue that these policies really go through a transformation process. So at every stage of a policy, there's an evolution, or the policy changes over time. So perhaps a policy may not be the same in different stages of this evolution and transformation. And as we all know, migration is very dynamic and constantly evolving process. So really intertwined with individual desire for change and aspiration for a better future. So what this means is that sometimes the policies are malleable. That means that at different stages, migrants or potential migrants may have more or less information and different aspirations and perceptions of these policies, potentially leading to different decisions and outcomes. So this is really just the background, and now I'll go into very, very preliminary findings, as I'm still in the process of analyzing the data that I have been able to collect the last couple of weeks. So this is very fresh. So some of the points that I've noticed so far and I've been able to analyze so far. So of course, one big finding is that the EU has really externalized the migration agenda through through these prominent financial instruments. So one is the UTF, the Emergency Trust Fund for Africa, but there's also other funding that are provided in Nigeria for return and integration programs. And this, I've seen so far that there's different also EU members who have also been providing some funding on this. Just really briefly, just to show you a little bit the numbers behind it. So IOM has been conducting the program mostly, and the project is called Strengthening the Management and Governance of Migration and the Sustainable Reintegration of Returning Migrants in Nigeria. And you see here how much money has actually been put on this program, which is 50 million. So it's quite a lot of money. Here again, as I mentioned before, we have to be careful with data. This data is mainly by IOM. I don't have any other data, unfortunately, on the general aspect of returns to Nigeria. It's very difficult to find reliable data on this. So this is really just from the IOM's perspective. So we can, according to IOM, since 2017 until today, 28,600 Nigerians have actually returned back to Nigeria, to their country. And on one side, you can see a little bit the map. It's a bit small, I hope you can see it, but you can see that Libya is one of the main countries of returns. So we can actually argue that the returns from the European side are very few. I mean, if you look at the numbers, most of the returns have actually been done within the African context. So Libya is one of the main countries. Niger is also another one. So we can really see that the returnees are actually coming back from Libya and the African context and not the European context. So this is one thing. Interestingly enough, the disaggregated data that we see, or at least we have available from IOM, we can see that there is almost 50-50 of male and female returnees. Quite interesting. And this is a whole other thing to look at, is the gender aspect of who actually migrates and who actually returns. So this is also interesting to see that there's almost 50-50 of returnees by either from male or female returnees in Nigeria at the moment. In terms of financing, again, so of the funding of the multilateral projects that have actually been funded. And here you can see this was done through an investigation of a journalist, actually, from the correspondent. They actually did a whole investigation of how much funding is actually available in Nigeria on migration. And this is specifically on return. So we can really see that a lot of money has been put into the return and integration programs. So you see the numbers here are actually in millions. And we can really see that most of the funding is actually provided to IOM, but also to GIZ at some point. So also to national agencies. So national agencies, I mean other EU national agencies that are currently on the ground in Nigeria. So we see a lot of the bulk of the funding, really the multilateral organizations, so the international organizations and the national agencies of the EU, such as the GIZ. And a bit less money is provided for NGOs and private companies. So this is really interesting to see that where the money or where the funding actually goes to. So who are the stakeholders in Nigeria? So there are international organizations, of course, but there's also civil society and NGOs who are providing assistance to the returnees. So for example, there have been a lot of also associations, so several returnees who have founded themselves associations and who provide also integration assistance. But as we can see from the previous slide, that not a lot of funding has been provided for the NGOs locally. So we really see that IOM has the bulk of the funding. So I think my time is also coming up soon, so I'm almost finished. So in terms of, I would really argue that IOM has really positioned itself as a subcontractor. So they're implementing aspects of migration policies on behalf of funding states of the EU, and they're really seen as a transmitter, diffusing norms and policies across countries. So if you just see here that this is not only for Nigeria, the annual budget, for example, in the last 2020, for example, was 242 million. So this is a lot of money that IOM has been providing on migration policies. In terms of impact on reintegration and the impact on the effect of return and integration programs, I would argue that we see a really stark differences here, because we see returnees, there are very few returnees from Europe. We see a lot of more returnees coming from Libya, for instance. And so I would argue that this is, the impact has been a bit different for different returnees. So I would argue that there is a bit of these groups, these two main groups, one more the deserving group and one more the undeserving groups. Because when we talk about assisted voluntary return, we only talk about those who actually voluntarily returned. We don't talk about those who've been deported back to Nigeria. So there's a bit of the deportees are seen a little bit as the undeserving, because once they return back to Nigeria, they usually don't have any access to the reintegration packages provided by IOM, because IOM is very strong in saying that the reintegration packages is only for those who have returned voluntarily back to their country. So there is a bit of this dichotomization of deserving and undeserving returnees. And this really creates an exclusion from reintegration support, because a lot of times deportees, if they return back, they go through a whole other process when they return, and they don't always have the support. This aspect of vulnerability, that assistance is only really granted to certain groups of deserving vulnerable migrants, while other programs who returned under other disadvantaged conditions do not have access to this kind of support. So, in conclusion, I would argue that there is an increased institutional and academic attention paid to the return and integration programs. However, as we can see from the data that we do have, most returns are not from Europe, but from Libya. But we do see that within the Nigerian context, both central and state administration in Nigeria and EU partners carry out these programs, to carry out these assisted voluntary return programs, indicating there is a presence of an interaction between the states, so the Nigerian state, but also the sub-states and international levels. And these policies have really evolved throughout the time, and they have been implemented mainly through these big financial instruments, such as the UTF. And voluntary return really appears to be the main instrument. So there's very little information on deportees, for example, or even spontaneous returns. We don't know how many people actually return spontaneously back to Nigeria. So it's very difficult to also compare these three different groups as well. And we see a little bit of competition as well, because GIZ is providing some assistance, IOM provides other assistance. So there's a bit of a challenge of this competition between different actors. And what I've really seen is that there's still a bit of a challenge of really monitoring and evaluation of these programs. It's very difficult to really understand what is the impact on longer term on these return programs. So there still needs to be a little bit more research on this to really understand how does a returnee come back, and how is the reintegration process really done through the returnee, but also the community as itself. So in not only the returnee as an individual, but what is the impact of these programs on the community as well. And just a last little thing that's what I was quite surprised to is that the Frontex, so the European Border and Coast Guard Agency from the EU, they've really rebranded themselves in the last years, and they also have a new mandate now on return, and they've actually started programs on voluntary return as well. So there's something to look at in the future to see how this will evolve as well, with this new agency taking one of the mandates on return integration in the Nigerian context, but also in the global context. So that's all for now. I hope I didn't go too long. It's 40 minutes, so that's all from my side. And thank you very much again for giving me the space. And I look forward to any questions or any feedback you might have.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Simona, for keeping to time, because you have not spent more than 35 minutes or less. So that was wonderful. And we have heard her. As we were presenting, I had so many things coming up in my mind. And I said, this amount of money I'm hearing appears very huge, very big. And I really wonder whether there's really a proof, which I believe there should be, of it really being expended on these migrants. And to even say it is voluntary returnees that IOM is interested in assisting, I think in my mind, that may not be fair enough, because the people that are being forced returnees, may also need the money as well as those voluntary returnees. Because if they are comfortable at home, maybe they will not really want to stay in another man's country. Because we have an adage here that says east or west, home is the best, nothing like home. So there must be something driving those people home. So I think the EU generally should look at migrants with more love and affection and really get into the nitty-gritty of the problem if they are actually assisting. But I can see a bias from this assistance. In my view, it may also be my own bias, but I think there's a bias in this assistance they are giving. And of course, you have said most of them came from Libya. So it means that many people wouldn't even want to go to EU, and it may not be unconnected with they are not being friendly enough. They may be a bit too harsh on these migrants. And we always want to believe we should be our brothers' keepers. We should care for one another. I don't think, from what I am seeing, I wouldn't want to believe that that law is really visible. I can't see it visible in what I'm seeing right now. But I may be wrong, so I'll give others a chance to express their opinions and ask their own questions. So let me start with the first person that has that had his hand up, and this is Mr. Olusoji Ajao. Over to you, sir.
All right, thank you. Simona, thank you. All right, thank you very much, Simona. Thank you so much for your brilliant analysis. And I want to commend your presentation being scientific and unbiased. You mentioned one of the stakeholders as the Samuel Hall. I did my research work with Samuel Hall in 2018 with IOM. We went to some states in Nigeria. And I like something once you mentioned that you are very skeptical about the data coming from IOM. And something you mentioned that the IOM is seen as a mafia. You are very correct in that. And also the migrant as messengers. All your facts are very correct. I just want to ask some questions. We can strengthen your own analysis too, because I'm happy that you are European. I made a presentation of the critique of the IOM interventions, again, about MIE, measurement and evaluation, the impact they are making. The question I want to ask, you mentioned something about the GIZ and the IOM. I want to make a clarification about that. IOM mandates focus exclusively on returning from Libya. Because of the externalization of the border of the EU, the chances of crossing from Libya to Europe is very slim. So most of the people for the past 4 years, their success rate is very low. Let's say about out of every attempted crossing, out of every 10, only 1 succeed. So most of them are coming back from Libya. Then about those who are forcefully rejected or deported from Europe, I think most of them are being catered for by the GIZ. Now, coming about the institutionalization of the returnees of the program for them, what I want you to look at is that when you say assistance for them, for those who return, are they sustainably reintegrated? That's the first question I want to ask. Maybe we can problematize that in your analysis. Because these returnees who came to Nigeria returned, some of them got like $1,000, sometimes $2,000. When Dr. Aneto was asking that, what about the money? They got the money factly. They got the money. One of them I spoke to, she got the money from IOM. She used the money again to get passports, also trying to go to Poland. All right. So the question is that, are they properly reintegrated? Then what's the content of that reintegration package? When they returned, a girl of 16, she was trafficked to Libya as a sex slave. She came back to Nigeria. She wanted to go to university, but they gave her training to start business. That's what IOM does for them. Anybody who returns from IOM must start a business without looking at the returning him or herself, that what you want to do with your life. This lady I spoke to, she wanted to go to university in Nigeria, Uniben. She could not get money to fund her education. Then she got trafficked by somebody she met on Facebook. That person got her to Libya. Now, upon return to Nigeria, IOM forced her to start a business, which she doesn't want. She wants to go to school. So IOM gave her like $2,000. She now used that $2,000 to contact travel agents in Nigeria to process the admission to Poland. Now, this is what I'm coming to. Thank God you are working with the Open University. So the IOM the intervention of IOM is not connecting to the needs and the aspirations of the returnees. They just assume you return to Nigeria. The next thing you do with your life, come and learn catering, come and learn fashion design. They are not even asking them a kind of a case-by-case analysis. Like this lady I was talking about now. If IOM has offered her admission to National Open University, that girl will have been sustainably reintegrated. Do you see my point, Simona? So again, so that's one of the things these are the kind of policy formulation. When the Europeans come around, they tell you this is your problem and this is your solution. The solutions are not contextualized to the society. And again, another thing I want you to say, when you say don't go, basically what they are actually doing is that push them back, keep them in their country. They are not interested about are they sustainably reintegrated. And I spoke to you, one of the migrants has messaged that you mentioned that one of the partner organizations working with them, it created a sense of dependency. People are just collecting training from GIZ. GIZ will give them like $1,000, go and go to IOM training, collect another $1,000. So, and I work with another one, they call it CIFA, the migrant project. That will give them like 500,000. So what they do is that these returnees, they are not even interested in using the knowledge they are gaining. They are waiting for GIZ training because this GIZ, they have a target, train 5,000 returnees. IOM also have targets. So they are training them. So in the case, they are now recycling training. I met people who have attended like 5 different training programs for returnees. Yet they have nothing to show for it in their lives. Do you see my point? So basically, in your analysis, again, I think maybe we can now look at is the problem, the content of the reintegration program. When they return from Europe or from Libya, especially most of them are from Libya, what is the content of the reintegration program? Most of them is go and start a business. How do you expect a girl of 18 who doesn't have that intention, all it was to go acquire education and start a life? So basically, I would suggest that IOM should be more flexible in terms of reintegration program so that these folks, they don't become forever dependent on IOM or GIZ interventions or handouts. Thank you very much.
Thank you for
Please.
that contribution. I can see who is talking. Any other person?
Yes, ma'am. Director. It's Tijani.
Okay.
Professor
Good afternoon. Yeah, welcome.
Good morning.
Sir.
Good morning. I'm sorry I came in so late and I just woke up. The time difference, and yesterday was busy at our end too. But notwithstanding, please accept my apology, and I'll listen to Ms. Simona or Dr. Simona's presentation. But I want to piggyback on the director's comment and the last speaker's comment. And the first thing, I'm going to be a lone star in the sense that we should please avoid sentiments in our interpretation. I am an Africanist. I'm an Afrocentric scholar. I'm not Eurocentric, but there are certain things that we should be at least objective about. The organization or the agency being analyzed by this scholar and the organization being brutalized, quote unquote, by the last two speakers are just not, we have to be within the middle of this, because one, what has your government, Libya, Ethiopia, Nigeria, etc., done for its citizen to ensure that you prevent even the mass exodus of youth? What is in place? What is the place of corruption? And when you talk about specificity, how are we obedient? I'm not a politician, at least not in Nigeria. How are we obedient? So don't misinterpret my use of obedience in the political parlance ongoing in Nigeria. How are we as citizens of each nation obedient to the policy, to the rules? Okay? So if you happen to be a returnee and you were given $1,000, what stops you from rethinking instead of getting another passport, which of course you will have gotten through crooked means, and then trying to venture out when institutions like the National Open University is available, when learning soft skill is available, when there are so many opportunities available? Okay, not all of us will go to university and earn a degree. So we got to be careful instead of, criticizing that agency. We have to be very careful in the way we draw the line in terms of its mandate. Somebody mentioned its mandate. Okay, its mandate. We contextualize within the mandate of that agency. It could be another agency. Is he achieving his agency? Is he being funded? Is he working within his budget? Because one thing is for an agent or even a government to sponsor you. It's for you to follow the rules. Some of us went to London. I'm not saying, don't say, oh, there's generational gap. No, I'm not a Methuselah. We went to London on scholarship, Commonwealth scholarship. We didn't force ourselves. We had the opportunity to stay, but we returned. And you couldn't even go to your office. You return, you have this cultural insanity on campus, whereby your former teachers see you as a threat. For the young lady trafficked for sexual whatever, he or she too cannot fully be blamed. Is it the parental situation? Is this the societal situation? Governmental situation? I think we should draw out some of the good things as far as this particular agency being historicized, analyzed by Dr. Simona, and then look at how they can forge ahead and improve. I did not hear about the collaboration with the government and other agencies because I wasn't privileged. I just woke up, and I'm sorry if my voice is still is warming up. Ordinarily, I would shut my video, but I just let me sit in this corner and quickly make intervention because I wouldn't have slept well or think well for the rest of the day listening to the director as well as the last speaker. They are experts. I'm not disputing that, but I'm only saying that there's more to it. And if an agency, one thing I know is the transparency and the uncorruptible dispensation, except if Mr. Ajao or Dr. Ajao has a contrary opinion, having worked with the agency in the past or is still there. And I thank you. But it's a very, 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 multi-dimensional situation that when we begin to x-ray, we begin to analyze, we got to move from the general to specific. And I think specificity is important. And we can continue the debate. I saw Dr. Ajao raising up his hand again. I am here to learn. We learn every day as we were taught yesterday. And the inclusiveness of this discussion will enrich our knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Tijani. Well, let me just say, one is not crucifying IOM, if that is what it appears to be, but we want to be sure of what this is of our facts and figures. Of course, we have not backed our country's corruption or negligence in their own duties. Nobody has ever come on this platform to support. If anything, we always say it is the factors at home that are pushing the people to want to leave their country. And that is based on government, our own government. So we have never really supported our government. Of course, everybody keeps condemning and condemning, but we're not looking for ways to make those people who are coming back and people are claiming we are at their service, we are helping them, yet they are coming back. We have given this amount of money, we are giving that amount of money. How true is it? We are not saying some of them will not go and buy passport, whether true or false, but it may not be in all cases. So it's not really to criticize anybody, to say you are not doing. Of course, we know we have our flaws. We have our flaws in Nigeria, and we always address that in every presentation. I don't even support it at all. I always say, yes, people will always migrate because there's something pushing them to migrate. But if people say they are spending so much on them, and then they are not selectively removing those we think should enjoy it, we can also mention it, that first returnees need the support as much as assisted voluntary returnees. So it's not criticizing. That's my own part, but then I'm sure you, maybe I don't know that you were there at the beginning, how I started to own, yes. But I know you heard Mr. Ajao's own. But so that we don't argue too much, let's see whether there are others. Mr. Ajao, I'll come back to you, but let's see whether there are others who want to contribute to this discourse. Then we'll come back to you, Mr. Ajao. Just
and me too.
Put down your okay, and you too. Okay, let's see. Are there others? I know there are some people. Okay, I can see here. I'm seeing Professor Moni Oluwa is here, our DVC technology, and I know that they will have one or two things to add to this because I will come back to those of us who have made comments before. I can see Mrs. Sileka there. She may have something to add. And so please, let's hear from you, our learned colleagues. Thank you. We are waiting. Eh?
While we are waiting on them, I wanted to say that it is not just a Nigerian thing. Don't let us, because we are located in Nigeria, it shouldn't be a Nigerian thing. It is also a Mexican situation. Just yesterday, we have news in and out, in and out. You know, despite all the programs to really impact those that are forcing themselves or being forced by this, the governor of the state of Texas, for instance, and other Republicans. So back to Mexico, it is not, it's a global phenomenon. It's just that, you know, we are contextualizing IOM within Nigeria, I suppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Kwanashi, over to you, ma. I can see your hand up.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to make a contribution. I want to thank Dr. Simona for this presentation, this wonderful presentation, and for taking interest in migration issues as it relates to Nigeria. You being from Austria, and we like it when people take positive interest in it. And what I just want to add is that her studies and the comments that have followed shows that research is of paramount importance. You know, we need to be able to trace what happens or what has been happening to the returnees, whether on a voluntary basis or those that have been forced to return, and gather that data to better inform us as to which way we should go as far as postvention is concerned. You know, and it's a challenge to us, really, that somebody from outside the country, the sub-region, the West African sub-region, is taking this issue to address it and to find solutions. We, on our part, we should be encouraged to do the same thing, so that what we are doing going forward is informed by actual data from what is on ground. So research can be done in this area by students, PhD students, even by individuals in related disciplines. And the Center for Migration and Global Studies can take the lead in this. I believe that you can form research groups with people within, those people that are more directly involved in migration matters, and even those of us who are remotely involved, to find out what is happening on the ground. We say we know.
I don't know, is Mr. Ajao still ready to say something, but please make it brief. I saw your hand up that time
just
like I said
30 seconds, I'm done. 30 seconds, I'm done. Now, the video I sent to you was a beneficiary of IOM training package. She attended the training and they refused to pay her money of $1,500. The IOM does not give them cash directly. IOM asks them to nominate a supplier. Maybe they want to buy sewing machine. They will now pay the money to the sewing machine seller's account, and that person will give them. So this lady has completed the training for 1 year. They refused to pay her the money. And she now said that our case manager at IOM asked her that he wants to give her the person who will supply her, like the contractor who is going to supply the machine for her. She said no, she's bringing her own contractor who will supply the machine. So these are the story she recounted. I work with 30 Libya returnees who benefited from IOM. 2 of them voluntarily decided to put this video out there, to put it in the open. So that's why I put it there. It's an evidence. We are not alleging IOM mishappened or what they're doing that is not good. And also share a link again with IOM in Netherlands. What they are doing is that they are looking for Nigerian talents. People want to go overseas. It's not a crime. This is a globalized age. A Nigerian has legitimate aspiration to seek for job globally, since we have neoliberal opportunity to work. And these guys in other Netherlands, what they are doing is that they look for Nigerian talents. You don't need to be a university degree, as Professor Jani said. It's very correct. And that is the trend now. You can actually get a short course, 6-month course, which can set you up as a software engineer, then you get a job. The link I sent is called IOM Match. They get Nigerians who finish secondary school, who want to travel overseas, and they connect them with IT-related jobs overseas. So this is my submission. I agree with you, Professor Tijani. You are very correct with analysis. And at the same time, the point is that what is our government doing? I think is a question of our leaders, of our graduates, who are more salary-oriented than job creation. Most of our graduates, when they finish, they look for a job. A friend of mine just came from Israel. He has a scholarship to school in Israel, a scholarship. He came back again and said, give me a job. He's a graduate. So our graduates have job-seeking mentality instead of job-creating mentality. And what we see is that people fix them all with job opportunities. That's one of the things which I'm just trying to problematize. An average European person or Western person think of how can I create to expand the cake, not about fighting over the existing cake. So that's my submission. Thank you so much, Professor. I accept with your propositions.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Director, may I quickly say that I will advise Ms. Simona to reach out to the Department of Peace Studies, look for Dr. Iroye, because we're already supervising, or we've supervised something similar, and they have reached, master's and master's thesis already submitted and graduated. But we are also supervising doctoral student. On my part, I'm supervising 2 gratis, and I know they are touching on some element of IOM and other agencies in this respect. Thank you very much. So the Peace Studies Department could be another source. As secondary as it may be, it may lead to reinvestigating the ethnographic methodology used by these students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, I incidentally went to look for Dr. Iroye 2 days back because they are undergoing accreditation in his department and faculty. Everyone is busy, all hands on deck on that. So, but I hope maybe by tomorrow, we'll go and see if he can have ears to listen to Simona, because Simona is leaving this weekend. So I'll see if we can reach him, but it's a bit tight with the university generally now because of this accreditation issue. But I'll still see what we can do. I want to look for him on my own because I wanted to have a chat with him concerning some things in this center. So thank you very much, sir, for that. We work on it. Professor Monioluwa is going to say something and person to say something. Over to you, welcome on board, ma.
Good afternoon, Director and all participants. Want to congratulate Simona for a well-delivered presentation. Unfortunately, I didn't come in early enough. I came in when she was presenting her conclusion and endnotes. So I may not be able to actually make much contributions, but I observed that there is need for synergy of activities from the discussions that have gone ahead. If the department is doing something and the center also is interested in something, we need to have a database. And that is why we have the Directorate of Research Administration. I will advise maybe the center will push with the Directorate of Research Administration to have an inventory of work being done, research, particularly. If we have PhD students, we have master's students that are working on certain projects. I think it's the responsibility of those units to make the information available to the research directorate, particularly if they are funded work. And we need to also let the Office of Linkages and Advancement know, because if we are being funded, it's partnership. And it's one of the things that that office should also have record on. I hope I have been able to say something meaningful. Director, back to you.
Yes, thank you so much, my girl. I've said at least something, especially that of the synergy of, putting the research together so that we all know what each other is doing and be able to flow together. That is very much taken. And if I see Dr. Eroye and especially people in social sciences, I know they have one or two things to do with migration issues. So I'm going to fish out what is happening and also advise them that let's move to the base. Let us go to research administration and put things together and let it flow from there so that we can all work together. This is what is desirable globally now. We should work collaboratively. And so this synergy is much appreciated. Thank you, ma'am. I can see Professor Tijani's hand up again. Is it up or the former one? Professor Tijani, sir, you are muted.
Former one. Let me bring it.
You want to make a point?
No,
Okay,
ma'am. It's the former one.
Okay,
Sorry, I'm putting it down.
Okay, thank you so much. So at this junction, we ask Simona to kindly respond to all the comments as briefly as possible. Let's hear from you, Simona.
Great, thank you so much. It's always useful to get. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear me now. Yes, great. Yes. Thank you so much. We are hearing you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you again for the feedback. There was a couple of points that there were many points. I won't go into too much details, but it's true. I mean, and I have to apologize because I did have other interviews that I've had. For example, this morning I had an interview, so I'm still in the process of analyzing data. So this is not the final product. So for example, I have had interactions with here in Abuja, the government as well. Those who are currently doing the SOP and operationalization of the SOP. So this has not been really analyzed yet. So it's still a bit of fresh information that I still need to look at. And I mean, of course, it's right. I mean, we don't have to point the fingers to IOM. There is the ERIN project as well, which I know from the European context, for example, that there are different reintegration packages from the EU. So for example, ERIN, I know Austria quite well, and I have had several interviews also with Nigerian migrants in Austria in order to understand if they actually do intend to return. So this is the other side of the coin. So I'm trying to really have a bit of an overview between what happens in the European context and what happens in one. For example, European context, the interviews that I've had so far, I understood that, for example, Switzerland is one of the ones that gives more money. So they, for example, provide 3,000 euros for the integration package. Whereas on the Austrian side, they only provide 2,000. So already there, we see a very diverse type of money that's given to the returnees. So what is the correct one? How much money is really needed for their integration? And during my interviews, I actually did ask, what does sustainability actually mean to the person I interviewed? So sustainability is really, it's very difficult and very complex thing to look at, because exactly that, how are returnees really reintegrated back into the community? How long does it take for them to really be integrated into the community? On the one hand, of course, is the financial help, but not only, because at the end, it's also the community that needs to reintegrate the returnee as well. And I've had the chance last week to talk to some of the returnees here in Abuja. And this is some of the challenges they face, for example. So the first challenge is really that they cannot go back to their families because they're really stigmatized. They cannot be going back to their families right away. It's a long process. So it takes time for them to really understand, okay, I came back, now what is the next step? And the persons I talked to last week, they all have dreams and aspirations, of course. Some of them were doing these trainings, vocational trainings, trying to do a small business. But you're right, of course, not everyone is an entrepreneur. And of course, there has to be also other options. And I think the flexibility aspect is important for sure, because not everyone is an entrepreneur. So I think at some point also GIZ with these vocational trainings, from what I understood, I did have the chance to talk to a GIZ a couple of days ago. So I'm still trying to understand a little bit what their programs are doing in terms of also job placements and what kind of jobs they can offer, what kind of training they can offer. I've talked to also the Ministry of Labor. So they also have these MRCs, Migrant Resource Centers. And the interesting what they told me is that, for example, they are also focusing on, not focusing on the irregular aspect of migration, but the legal pathways. What are other options? Are there any options, for example, to move to Europe legally? And this is something that I also take in my work. And I also always give this recommendation that there needs to be more legal pathways also for people outside of Europe to actually have access. So for example, if I want to study in Austria, I can just check and see what the requirements are, or if I want to do a study abroad, or if I want to do an exchange with the company. So this is what still is missing, at least from what I've had the pleasure so far to understand from the European side and from the Nigerian side. So the people I talked to from the Nigerian government side, they were really emphasizing on this legal pathway. So they were really saying this is still missing, and the EU needs to also provide some solutions on this. So there's need for this legal pathways for people really to be able to move regularly and not take the irregular migration routes. And of course, I mean, there is really a need for research for sure. And I'm glad to connect to, I can give you my email, and I'm glad to connect to anyone else, any master's students or PhD students working on this, because I find this fantastic. I mean, migration studies is very multidisciplinary. So my background is in criminology, so it's also part of the crime side of migrations. I used to work a lot on human trafficking. But I mean, it's multidisciplinary. Migration is so broad, and I really like to also talk to other people and see what other research is out there. So for sure, I mean, I'm always open to connect to. That's also a reason why I'm here. I thought it was important to also be in Abuja for that, because online, everything is possible online nowadays, but in the end, face-to-face, or at least interaction like these is still very important. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Simona. And I must say that short but very interesting. We all enjoyed your presentation. I don't know, is anybody wishing to say something? I can see one hand up. Okay, Ali AS, more comments. So all we will now say is thank you, Simona, and we hope you've enjoyed your stay in Nigeria. I would have liked you to tell us in 1 or 2 minutes how your migration to Nigeria, because you are, for us, like, you are a migrant. So you are not a returnee, you are a migrant. You are going to return to your country voluntarily now, right? So there's no issue. So let's hear, what was the experience like in entering Nigeria? Because we know that some of us, when we travel, some of us come with good and bad stories, even crossing border. So let me just hear 1 or 2 things. Maybe let our audience hear. Since you are practically here now, physically here, let's hear your migration experience to Nigeria. How sweet, how tough, how easy. Let's just hear from you 1 or 2 things, so that it will help us to improve, or the people that need to hear, we improve the areas we are not doing well. Just give us that in 5 minutes, so we'll close the meeting.
Great, thank you. I can only give good things and good reviews, as it's been a really great experience. And so this is my first time in Nigeria, but I used to work quite a lot in West African context, and it's been really great. I mean, from all the people that I've met so far, everyone's super nice and very warm. So you have warm weather and warm people. In the European context, this is less the case. So I really had a great time, and I know it was very short stay, but I hope to come again. I'll have to see next year. My PhD is coming to an end the next couple of months, but I do still hope that perhaps next year I can still come again and to continue the research, as I think it's important to be in the country as well. I mean, with the pandemic, it's been really difficult also for PhD students, at least in the European context. Austria was in lockdown since 2 years, basically. So this is the first year that we're actually able to travel, even outside of the European side. So it was, for me, it was very exciting to actually be able to go far, far away from the European context and to actually be able to come here. So I think this is also something we need to reflect on, that things such as the pandemic, I mean, it might not be over, it might still come back. So to really try to see if how things will evolve in the next years. But I'm really grateful that I was able to at least come once this year. I would have liked to come again already last year or 2020, but it was really, really difficult for us, at least from the European side, to travel because everything was really on lockdown. So it was a long 2 years. And as a researcher, it's difficult to, as a sociologist, mostly it's difficult to do research online. So I really appreciate being here and to be able to see people and to talk to people face to face. And I hope to do that again sometime soon.
Okay, thank you for those kind words. At least that place, the weather is warm and the people are warm. At least I can take that. Thank you so much, and we appreciate your coming. And we are praying that you successfully complete your PhD, and of course, National Open University would want to read or have a copy, if possible, of whatever you have done in our Center of Excellence and Migration Library. So we'd like to have a copy of the research work, and this presentation, if you can write it up, we want to review it and have some very concrete things from me to probably review and present in our journal of migration, of International Journal of Migration and Global Studies. But your research, when you complete it, we don't mind having a copy to put in our library. If you send us soft copy, we can print it out and bind it and put out there. We are very good to do such things. Okay, so having said that, I think we may call it a day because it looks like nobody has further comments or questions. So thank you very much for sharing with us this afternoon. We wish you best of luck in your undertakings. Thank you and bye-bye. So bye-bye, everyone. Thank you for making it a fruitful day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Yeah.